Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging straight into, one of history's most baffling medical mysteries.
Absolutely. We're talking about Karolina Olsson.
The Sleeping Woman of Okno. She spent an incredible 32 years in some kind of unexplained sleep.
Yeah, it sounds like something straight out of a fairy tale. A real-life sleeping beauty, you might say.
But the reality, as we'll see, is much stranger, and it brings up so many questions.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, you've given us a great narrated account laying out the basic story, plus a really detailed YouTube video transcript.
Right, and that transcript digs much deeper into potential explanations, doesn't it? Medical theories, even links to folklore.
It does. It gives us a lot to work with.
So our mission today really is to navigate this incredible story together. We want to try and unpack this just bizarre medical and psychological puzzle.
Trying to separate the facts from, all the speculation that's naturally built up over a century.
Because it is still fascinating, isn't it? Why does this story still grab us? Well, look at the timeline, those perplexing symptoms.
The symptoms that just stumped the doctors back then.
Yeah, and how people reacted at the time, and then jump into the modern theories, trying to make sense of what seems, impossible.
Okay, let's dive in. To really get a feel for this, you need to picture the setting.
Right. Okno Island, Sweden, late 1800s.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Small, pretty isolated island off the East Coast. Karolina was born there in 1861. Life was simple, very connected to the seasons, farming, fishing.
Her family, parents, 5 brothers, living in a small cottage.
And crucially, advanced medical care like we know it today just wasn't part of their world. Very limited resources.
And this quiet life just completely shifts gears. On February 18th, 1876, Karolina's 14.
She's heading home, takes a shortcut across a frozen river, and here the details get a bit murky.
Yeah, some accounts say she slipped and fell through the ice, nearly drowned.
Others just say she tripped, hit her head hard on the ice. Either way, something significant happened.
And that seems to be the trigger for, everything that followed.
That's right. She gets home, complains about a toothache, a headache.
Initially, her parents weren't overly worried, right? Figured it was just from the fall.
Probably. Told her to rest. But it didn't get better. The pain got worse over the next few days.
Severe toothache, debilitating headaches.
And this is where their isolation and the beliefs of the time really come into play.
Living remotely, far from doctors, you can see how they might look for other explanations when things got worse.
Absolutely. The YouTube transcript mentions the superstitions back then. Whispers about witchcraft started. It's hard for us to grasp now, maybe.
But their understanding of illness was just different.
Very different. And those beliefs were deep-rooted. The transcript mentions the past-scaring tradition around Easter.
Oh yeah, kids dressing as witches.
But it wasn't just playing. It came from a genuine centuries-old fear that witches traveled to a mythical place, Blue Mountain.
So this context is key. A healthy girl gets suddenly, mysteriously ill.
Within that mindset, the idea of some, dark influence wouldn't seem totally outlandish to her parents.
And then, the night it all changed. Not long after the fall, she goes to bed.
And just doesn't wake up.
Not the next morning. Not the day after.
For 32 years, it's just mind-boggling.
This is where the story just becomes unbelievable.
Absolutely. Imagine the parents' panic. Desperation. Days turn into weeks. She's still unresponsive.
And they tried some pretty extreme things to wake her, didn't they? The narrated account mentioned.
Distressing stuff. Burning her skin, pricking her with needles, even under the fingernails.
Sounds horrific now, but you have to assume it came from utter helplessness.
A desperate, probably misguided attempt to shock her back somehow. Did the sources say if any of that even got a flicker of response?
No, nothing indicates it worked, which just highlights how deep this state was.
And remember their situation. Farmers, fishers, remote island. Getting a doctor from the mainland, that cost money they didn't initially have.
So for those first days, weeks maybe, they were on their own. Limited resources, local advice.
Which must have fueled their reliance on those older beliefs too.
Okay, but how did she survive for so long? 32 years is staggering.
That's one of the core mysteries. Reportedly, she was sustained on just 2 glasses of warm milk with sugar. Every day. For decades.
2 glasses of milk. That alone sounds impossible.
It does. And physically.
Yeah.
This is where it gets even stranger.
Her hair and nails apparently didn't grow.
That's what the accounts claim, which is really unusual for someone in any kind of long-term unresponsive state.
And her body didn't waste away. No severe muscle atrophy.
Apparently not. She didn't seem to suffer the kind of physical deterioration you'd expect after decades of immobility and minimal nutrition.
It's like she was, as one source put it, paused.
Exactly. That physical preservation defies typical medical understanding. It's a huge part of why this case is so debated.
So eventually doctors did get involved.
Yes, the community eventually pooled resources, brought doctors from nearby towns to the island.
And they were just baffled.
Completely. They could see she was unresponsive, but couldn't diagnose it, couldn't wake her.
Then she was moved to a hospital.
Right. In 1882, 6 years after she fell asleep, moved to Oskarshamn.
Which must have been a big deal back then.
A very big deal. And there, they tried more interventions, even electroshock therapy.
Wow. Still nothing.
Still nothing. She remained in this deep sleep.
And one of the early diagnoses mentioned was dementia paralytica.
Yes, which is interesting. The YouTube transcript points out that's usually linked to syphilis, typically in older people.
So highly unlikely for a 14-year-old girl with no other signs.
Exactly. It really highlights the limits of medical knowledge then, maybe even a bit of desperation to just put some label on it.
So while Caroline is in this suspended state, life just carries on around her.
For 32 years, seasons change, people are born, people die. Her own family.
It's quite something to think about. The life she missed.
Immense toll on the family, surely. Her mother died in 1904.
While Carolina was still asleep.
Yes. And one of her brothers also died, drowned, in 1907.
Tragic. And there was that detail about the brother's funeral.
Ah, yes. Really striking. It was reported that while she was still seemingly unconscious, she actually cried during the funeral.
Cried. That suggests something was getting through. Some level of awareness.
It certainly hints at some internal processing and emotional response, even if she couldn't outwardly react otherwise. It's fascinating.
And then there was the maid hired after the mother's death, reporting strange things.
Right. Missing candy from the room, things like that. When Karolina was supposedly the only one there.
So, does that suggest maybe she wasn't always completely unconscious? Perhaps periods of awareness?
It definitely raises that possibility. It blurs the lines, doesn't it? Was it continuous deep sleep, or were there moments, brief awakenings maybe, that went unnoticed or unrecorded?
The aging thing?
Yeah.
She didn't seem to age normally.
Or aged much, much slower. That's another layer of the mystery that modern theories try to tackle, but at the time just added to the bafflement.
Okay, so this goes on for decades.
Yeah.
Then suddenly it ends.
April 3rd, 1908. After 32 years and 42 days. The maid hears a noise.
Finds her awake, but not just awake.
No, crawling on the floor, weeping, hysterical, understandably distressed.
Imagine that shock. For the maid, for Carolina herself.
And her first question, where is my mother?
Heartbreaking. Shows exactly where her mind was still trapped back in 1876. No idea 3 decades had passed.
None at all. The world she woke up to was completely alien.
Her brothers are grown men she doesn't recognize.
Electric lights, modern clothes, all the changes between 1876 and 1908, completely foreign to her.
Her mind was still essentially that of a 14-year-old.
Like opening a time capsule and then the recovery. That's maybe the most astonishing part.
Despite decades of immobility, minimal food, she made a full recovery.
Reportedly, yes. No lasting brain damage, no major muscle decay, which again, medically is very hard to explain.
It really defies what we understand about the body's response to that kind of situation.
It does. After that, she lived a quiet life, understandably wanting to avoid the spotlight.
Passed away in 1950, age 88.
But the story, her mystery, never really died. Still no definitive explanation today.
Which brings us to the theories. What could possibly explain this?
Well, first, you absolutely have to consider that historical context we talked about. The superstition.
Witchcraft, black magic. Those beliefs were very real in 19th century Sweden.
Definitely. So for her parents, the community, seeing this inexplicable illness, that explanation would have felt plausible, maybe even probable.
Especially being isolated, without easy access to doctors offering other ideas.
Right. A curse, some enchantment that fits the worldview of the time and place.
Then there was that actual medical diagnosis later. Hysteria.
Yes, Dr. Omblad's diagnosis, and we have to unpack that term a bit.
Because it wasn't used like we might think of it today, was it?
Not at all. In the 18th, 19th centuries, hysteria was this huge, vague category. A catch-all diagnosis, mostly for women, for almost any ailment doctors couldn't explain.
So calling Carolina's condition hysteria was maybe typical for the era.
It reflects the limitations of medicine then, definitely, and a tendency to pathologize women's unexplained conditions. The YouTube transcript mentions some really out there historical theories about it.
The roaming uterus and things like that.
Exactly. Ideas that seem completely bizarre now. So Dr. Omblad thought her sleep was this extreme form of hysteria, a psychological withdrawal.
But the electroshock, a common hysteria treatment then, didn't work on her.
Right. Which casts some doubt on that diagnosis being the full picture, doesn't it?
Okay, so moving to more modern ideas, resignation syndrome.
This is a really interesting, though tragic, parallel. It's mainly seen in refugee children in Sweden today.
Kids who experience severe trauma, often related to seeking asylum.
And they just withdraw completely, stop walking, talking, opening their eyes, become totally unresponsive.
The similarities are striking, aren't they? The prolonged unresponsiveness.
Even occasional emotional signs like crying, similar to Karolina at her brother's funeral, and there's debate about whether it's purely psychological.
The transcript gave some sad examples. Children eating feeding tubes, seeming lifeless.
It's heartbreaking. So the theory for Karolina would be maybe some trauma, perhaps more than just a fall, maybe the near drowning aspect, if true, triggered a similar profound psychological withdrawal, just much, much longer.
Another possibility mentioned is Klein-Levin syndrome.
Right, KLS, sometimes called sleeping beauty syndrome, though that trivializes it a bit. It's a rare neurological disorder.
Causes recurring episodes of extreme sleepiness.
Exactly. Episodes can last days, weeks, even months. People might sleep up to 20 hours a day.
And when awake, they're not quite themselves, kind of out of it.
Often, yes. Only waking briefly to eat or use the bathroom, maybe seeming confused or childlike. Then between episodes, they're completely normal.
Does that fit Karolina?
Well, some aspects. KLS typically starts in teenage boys, but not always. And interestingly, the transcript notes that kids with KLS often outgrow it by their 40s.
And Karolina woke up at 46. That timing is noticeable.
It is. The cause isn't known, maybe hypothalamus injury, autoimmune response, genetics. It's very rare, fewer than 100 reported cases. So we can't say for sure, but it's a plausible candidate to consider.
Of course, with something this strange, you have to ask, could it have been a hoax?
You absolutely have to consider it. The sheer unlikelihood of surviving 32 years like that on so little food without severe physical decline, it raises questions.
People argue that point a lot.
And the idea that maybe she was conscious sometimes, intermittently.
And the family concealed it. Why?
Maybe fear of stigma, being seen as lazy, mentally ill, even possessed given the times. Maybe maintaining the sleeping woman narrative felt safer or simpler.
But was there evidence they gained from it? Money, fame?
Not really. According to the transcript, they didn't seem to exploit the situation for profit or seek lots of attention. They weren't touring her around or anything.
So a deliberate long-term hoax seems maybe less likely.
Perhaps. And the idea of intermittent sleep rather than one solid 32-year block makes more biological sense.
Allowing for basic care, maybe more food during brief wakeful periods?
Yes, exactly. Without casual observers noticing. And the slow aging. Maybe lack of sun, stable indoor environment played a role. It's speculative, but possible.
Okay, one last angle the transcript brought up was folklore.
Yes, the connection to Sleeping Beauty. Sweden has such a rich history of fairy tales.
So it's tempting to see Karolina's story as a kind of real-world echo of those myths.
Consciously or not, yeah. And it's fascinating how the transcript discussed the original darker version of Sleeping Beauty, Sun, Moon, and Talia.
Right, very different from the Disney version. Much grimmer themes.
Definitely. But exploring those old stories shows this enduring human fascination with suspended animation, mysterious sleep, and miraculous awakenings. It taps into something deep, doesn't it?
It really does. So as we wrap up this deep dive on Karolina Olsson, we're still left with this core mystery, aren't we?
32 years of sleep, no single easy answer.
We've looked at hysteria, superstition,
resignation syndrome, Klein-Levin syndrome.
Even the possibility of a hoax. It's really up to listeners to weigh those ideas, I suppose.
Which explanation feels most plausible? Or maybe it's a mix of factors we don't fully understand.
And it does make you think, doesn't it? How much more we understand about the mind and body now compared to the 1870s.
Absolutely. Conditions we recognize today were completely unknown then.
So what mysteries might still be out there? Conditions we don't have names for yet. Could something like that explain these extraordinary cases?
Yeah.
Cases that seem to blur the line between reality and well, they're fantastic.
And what does Karolina's story ultimately tell us about human resilience, the body's adaptability,
Yeah.
and just the deep, deep mystery of consciousness itself?
Definitely a lot to ponder long after this deep dive.